When you're aging, more doesn't equal more.
I was born in the north of California.
Benefits of those devices, like you can track like when you got sick. Like I know, like I found like a lot of people when they get sick, like you can see the elevated heart rate. But it's just like we're just too hung up on metrics. That's what I'm trying to say these days. And like especially when you are, let's say, working in a corporate position, it's all about numbers, 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 numbers. And then when you have like these algorithms also feed into that, it's appealing for a lot of people. But just like it's not the be all and end all. You also like need to listen to what your body is telling you.
Yeah, that is great advice. I had days where my numbers just look terrible and I just go into things with no expectations, but then it ends up being one of my strongest days. I just feel great. Can you give a specific example of someone who was putting in a lot of miles and like you said, just maxing out their effort, doing the equivalent of a 50-hour work week on the bike, and then how you shortened that up and made it smaller and they improved, like doing less but got more?
I would say like that's like probably recently a good 90% of our clientele was like that. It's scary at the same time, like because let's put it this way, it's also like a psychological element here that I'm still like trying to wrap my head around. Like for me, cycling was my job. So like for me, if someone tells me like go ride your bike for 15 hours a week, I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that anymore. I've been there, done that. But like for a lot of people, especially like when they're like, let's say financially secure and like they can like close to retiring, they just like go off the rails and just like start riding like crazy. But when you're aging, more doesn't equal more because let's put it this way, then any teenager could ride, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 hours a week and turn into the next Pog. But that's not going to happen. And if you look at it from this point of view, I'm lucky that I've raced against Pog because like we're from the same country, we're both Slovene. I can tell you firsthand, a lot of the good riders that came from here, when they were younger, they didn't do massive hours. They were doing like 7 to 8 hours when they were still in school. Like just like an hour to two a day, not much more than that, like with managing with school and like extracurricular activities. But like the more it becomes your job, like subsequently you train more, but also the more your body is adapting, handling more workload. It's kind of like starting at a junior position at work. The more steps you climb, the more work you can handle and the more thick-skinned you are, right?
Right.
Would you say Rand would be an example of that? I mean, I know that Rand, obviously, I spoke to him on that first consultation. He'd been doing a lot, and he'd been doing a lot of like mid-intensity efforts, and he was kind of like we found with a lot of the older guys. They before they come to us, I would describe them as fit but slow. Essentially, what a lot of them have been doing is following training plans, which are your kind of generic training plans, which are designed for younger males. And what happens when these guys follow these training plans, which are designed for younger males, where they, a load of huge, big, long sweet spot phases, is they become relatively aerobically fit, but they become slow. Like they don't have any of that top end. They just are diesel chuggers, and I feel like that's where Rand was, and that's kind of totally transformed. Alex, I don't know. I think Kurt was asking for a case study. I don't know if that would be a good one to delve into.
I mean, there's like too many crossovers with a lot of people that I coach. So like I can see like your question with everyone to a degree, but like I don't like really have like a perfect example of like someone who like just like went completely crazy, rode a lot, and then we condensed it because like as I said, it's more or less 90% of people, especially the ones that like are close to retirement, that like just they don't have a care in the world, and then they not a care in the world. That's like a bad example, but that they can just like ride more. It's I'm still trying to like trying to figure out like that psychological element. Actually, Kenny would be a good example for that, just because like before that, like this is an older guy, close to his 70s as well, and he actually had a severe case of mononucleosis like 2 decades ago, and then he kind of stopped. From my memory, he kind of stopped like from all endurance sports, but then like started riding his bike heaps, just like a lot of hours. And then with us, like he's only doing like an hour and a half to 2 hours a day and 2 gym sessions a week. When we first began, it was just like, oh, I just want to survive the out route. So, well, he not only survived it, he actually podiumed on the last stage. It's one of those where reducing works because you're always fresh for that next session. And I think Dave also mentioned this to you. There's this client from Vegas that I work with. He always mentions the same thing to me. Why less works? Because he's just physically fresh after he gets done with the session. Okay, on the weekend when you do a long ride, like you can be a bit of a couch potato and just like sit on the couch and have a nap. But during the week, like you have an hour and a half, 2 hours, you have to maximize that, then get straight to work. And if you wake up at 5 a.m, let's say you ride between like 5:15 and 7 a.m, then you're straight to the office for like 9 hours. You still, again, need like cognitive function. Does that answer your question? Like, I know
Yeah,
I'm on tangents.
That's exactly right. And that's the thing I found is I could handle the rides on the weekends, but then I'll just be, especially if I do 2 long rides on Saturday and Sunday, I'm just shattered on Monday, Tuesday, maybe even Wednesday. So you really got to be like, and that was a point that Craig made, was not only does he have more energy for the bike, but he has a serious job, and he has the energy to be there for his job as well. The last couple of years I was trying to train about 12 hours a week, I think was what I was getting in. What is an example? Like, how many hours can someone get down to but still be effectively? Can you get a good program in at 5 hours a week?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I have he came on as a client. He's a good friend of mine by this point. Ben is his name. He started with me only on 5 hours a week and then finished a 360 kilometer race. And like he's training for the track, for the track now in Girona. We're only doing like 10 to 12 hours a week. Well, obviously he works from home, so he has that flexibility like to train a little bit more now. But in the beginning, when he did that race, that big 300K race, it was just like, it wasn't massive hours. He was just beginning in cycling, and it's like it slowly climbed. Again, it's quality over quantity. Massive hours don't mean much if you can't recover from them, and that's like the key point here. Is like, as I said, like fatigue is your friend, because without fatigue, you're not gonna improve. You're not gonna like break, let's call them, into higher grounds. But at the same time, you also cannot be wrecked all of the time if you have like other life commitments. And also just like looking at it from a hormonal point of view, if you're constantly wrecked, constantly tired, not adapting to training, your body then is completely skewed. Like you're just not going to adapt to anything.
There's this race or this ride here called put on by Santa Rosa Cycling Club called the Terrible Two. It's a 200-mile ride every year that they've had for decades. And I was talking to the guy who won it last year. Now he's younger. I think he's 20s, maybe 30s. He was saying he only trains like around 120 miles a week or something like that, maybe even less. But he talked about he did a lot of Zwift training, so where you're pedaling all the time. And where I was seeing him was there's a ride called Sugarland, where it's the top riders from the area around here go, and it is fast. And so he does those, which I'm sure helps. But I'd like you to address how someone can still do well at a very long event while training less hours and not necessarily just putting in monster miles all the time.
We came from a background where like you literally had to ride the distance of your event in order to race, because like if you rode that, then you're capable of it. But are you really? Like, look at it from a recovery point of view. Let's say you're training, I'm going to use kilometers here. So let's say you're training for a 200K race. But do you really need to ride 200Ks in a day, in a weekend? Or can you do, let's say, 3 to 4 hour rides back to back? A good friend of mine and a professional cyclist still to this day, Ricardo Zoidel, he used to race in Trek Segafredo, CCC, and these teams. Are you familiar with a race called the Otstaller? It's like a massive Grand Fondo, but a couple of years ago they had a UCI 1.1 race. So it was like the highest category one-day race, and it's basically 5,500 meters of climbing. You go like through over a couple of alpine passes, and it's even for the pros, it was like a 6.5 to 7 hour day. So I was asking him, because that year I was self-coached and he always gave me tips. He said, like, I'm not going to do like a big ride because I don't want to ride that much. And plus at the time he had also his first or second kid. So he did just blocks of 3 to 4 hours, just slowly extended the block, like literally did like a mini simulation. Well, if you just Google him and if you look up, like I think that was like 2019 or something, 2018, he finished on the podium of third or fourth. Like he was up there with World Tour riders.
Okay, so the guy you were talking about who is doing some, relatively small mileage, but did very well in this longer race. So you look at these people who are training more conservatively, i.e. not constantly up against the absolute maximum capacity of training load that one can possibly absorb and adapt to amongst life as well. And what happens is they string together weeks, months, years, back to back, without burning out, without getting all the little illnesses and niggles that the rest of us compulsive overtrainers get who are doing these huge long rides. And it is no coincidence, and we see it all the time. And we've got a good data set now, having been doing this for a long time. The guys who are not knocking up against the edge of their capacity, who leave a bit in the tank at the end of sessions, who are willing to cut a ride short, who say no to the crazy group rides if they're feeling a bit tired, and who generally just give themselves a manageable training dose as opposed to constantly pushing the limits. Yeah, they get, they still get the occasional cold and things, but they bounce back from it. Whereas the teammate who is constantly putting in the heroic rides and Strava gets that same cold and is wiped out for 3 weeks and then experiences a load of post-viral fatigue. So what I'm saying is this guy who was riding more conservatively in general, the fact is he was probably doing so in such a more consistent way than guys who are doing much bigger rides, who are, you do these huge rides and you fly too close to the sun, and then you either train in a really average way for a long time because you're tired, or you actually have loads of time off the bike through all these illnesses that you just keep picking up. Really unlucky. It's not unlucky, it's the fact that your reserves are so depleted from training too hard. So actually, being conservative as this guy was breeds consistency. And then he clocked in a few more 100 hours than the guys doing these in a year, than the guys doing these crazy big heroic rides which look great on Strava, but then they crash and burn for a few months, and then he did better. Like that's what we see. We see it so often. Consistency is everything.
I think that's a great point, because I think that was me as I was trying to do too much, and I was just getting so burned out by the end of last year, and just struggling because I was burning it at work, I was burning on the bike, and just really struggling. I wanted to circle back to one thing you were talking about earlier, is that variety, because as I was setting my goals for 2026, I was looking at my performance and I thought, I really want to work on my sprint, but then I was like, but I also would love this. My climbing has gone to terrible, but I'd also like to get my overall speed up. And then I started thinking, man, that's too much. I'm picking I want to improve on everything, but is there maybe a point that the variety, you can work on all of that, and it can be good for you at our age to be having that variety mixed in and work on it, try to improve on everything?
Yeah, for sure. But I think really, you need to work backwards from what the ultimate goal is. What is your ultimate goal, and what are your key limiters? Like, what is stopping you from achieving that goal? And then you really know the focal point of what you should be working on. If your goal is to win a 200-mile gravel race, it's probably not going to be your sprint, which is the make or break of that. Probably not. A sprint at the end of 200 miles is very different from a sprint from fresh. So really, endurance is going to be your key component there. I still think, even regardless of how old you are, our physiologies tend to work best from stacking. So picking, sectioning off months in the year and really focusing on one energy system. However, the difference is, let's say you're doing a kind of a 3 months of really focusing on one TTE, extending the amount of time you can ride at lactate threshold for, and then raising your functional threshold power. You still want to really have that as your focus in that training block. However, as an older athlete, so your FTP intervals, maybe your openers are going to be some short, hard sprints, and maybe your FTP intervals are quite rarely going to be steady state. Maybe they'll have lots of cadence changes. Maybe they'll have a few surges. Maybe there'll be more over-unders. So to answer your question, I think that you still need to be systematic and stack energy system upon energy system. Don't try and work all of your energy systems in the same training phase. I mean, just from a practical point of view, it becomes very difficult to try and piece together cause and effect when you're doing that, i.e. what training is causing what outcome. So still be systematic about what you do over the year. However, within those training blocks, you can certainly sprinkle in more variety. And I would say if your sprint is something that you want to work on, that can be sprinkled in really quite frequently. It doesn't necessarily need its own dedicated training block in the year. I think that would be a waste of time, but it could be something which you when you're feeling fresh, because really you need to be fresh to get those neuromuscular adaptations. What you're trying to do is kind of ignite as many muscle fibers as possible, and you need to be as fresh as you can be to do that. So yeah, at the start of FTP blocks, maybe you have a kind of a sprint specific warm up.
In this life, it drifts like waves to low secret shores. Yeah, it's like